Build versus buy argument now just becomes a whole lot more existential for many companies. And instead of build versus buy, you're now looking much more at build rather than buy, because the barrier of entry to creating something that'll give you 50% of what ServiceNow does has just become much more accessible and cheaper. And so why wouldn't you do that and save costs? So now you're looking at a world where, most SaaS platforms simply cannot deliver value fast enough at the rate that they need, because they've built businesses that are predicated on people and salaries, and they cannot justify the costs for that, because the value for which they're selling their software does not measure up to the buyer. Thank you for having me. My name is Yaron Schneider. I'm a CTO and co-founder at Digrid, company that I started in January of 22. Before that, I spent about 5 years at Microsoft, mostly focused on open source tech and serverless container platforms. I created the graduated CNCF project Dapper at Microsoft, donated it to CNCF in September of 21. Dapper gained major adoption. And so I left the Microsoft to form my own path in the world, really. And Dapper is all about reliability and orchestration for business processes, and today, mainly AI agents. And this is what we do at Digrid.
So I've been talking to a lot of guests. I've been playing around with agents. I've been using agents in my podcast post-production, and it's a complete paradigm shift of how you interact with software to get your job done. It's like, instead of selling features and like on your landing page saying, here's all the things that you can do with my software. It's, hey, here's all the things that our agent can do. Like, not selling features necessarily. You're selling labor for like well-scoped tasks. And I've been thinking like, okay, what's stopping someone from just configuring their own skill files in Cloud Code and doing this themselves versus it's going to keep paying money to the software? Like, I would say I'm an edge case. Like, I do use a lot of Cloud Code related agent softwares to fit any specific use case I want. But I still use Descript. I still use the software we're using to talk to each other. I'm not vibe coding video conferencing software for podcasting, but because you need to use both. Like, there's these very specialized tools that are really optimized, even have their own AI agents for editing. Descript's editing software is really great. But then there's more project management tools where if you had the gumption and know-how, you could just vibe code or use a terminal agent to do it for you. And so what really have you found in your journey working on AI agents what's the differentiating thing between you and Anthropic releasing something the next day and blowing up your business? Like, I think that's the big question is, okay, how's the game being played? What's stopping a bigger company from doing something like this?
Yeah, OpenAI and Anthropic, they really much focus on the best layer model, right? The LLMs themselves, this is their tech. Then you've got a higher level, which are the agent frameworks, taking a bunch of LLMs and orchestrating into something that can reason and then act and think on behalf to accomplish complex tasks. But then those agents need to become reliable. And you correctly said that it's about labor or saving labor in many cases. And there's two types of agents that are being used today. User agents, those that run locally on your machine. But the reason why we're seeing so much investment into the agentic space is because of the ROI that companies are looking at when they basically deploy agents to automate 50 or sometimes even 80% of all of their backend. So when you take agents and you're like, okay, instead of writing code now with 5 developers and spend $2 million a year, I can basically let a couple of agents run on my backend to automate all of those processes, and it's going to save me that work. Well, that becomes pretty lucrative. The problem with that, though, is that reliability is extremely important here, because as an industry, for the last 40 years, we've tried to make regular software reliable. And by regular, I mean we're seeing people, or would like to think we're seeing people. And so if we have a function, we have an input, and the input is the same, we expect the output to be the same, right? That's like what a normal person would think. But throw an LLM into the mix and it becomes totally unreliable because those things are non-deterministic. You could ask the exact same question 100 times and get, 20 different answers. So when it comes to LLMs, their probability of crashing, just restarting because of errors, uh, basically killing off entire workflows are much higher than regular software. Then the question becomes, how do you make that entire thing reliable from the get-go? And Anthropic and these larger businesses do not focus on that layer. That's what our differentiation is today.
Yeah, I think about like big macroeconomic trends, right? The companies that win are the ones that build on top of like the existing infrastructure. So there's forgot like there was this oh yeah, it's Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was a railroad tycoon. Like that's what he's known for. But he started as a shipping businessman with sailboats. And he moved things through sailboats and made a lot of his money through shipping stuff up the Mississippi River, because the Mississippi River was a huge shipping hub, because it was so hard to get things inland into the United States. And then those packages or crates or whatever got shipped to St. Louis would then be put on horse-drawn carriage over rough terrain to get to its final destination. And then as he was seeing railroad technology getting better, he made this huge bet and sold all of his boats and the ships. Yeah, he sold all his boats, very the ship's style, recapitalized, liquidated all his assets, and then reinvested in this new railroad technology, because now you don't need the Mississippi River if you have railroads. You could just load it up in Port of New York, get it inland just as effectively as going through the Mississippi, if not more. And my whole thought process about AI is, okay, what were the current infrastructure before AI came along? And it was basically CRUD interfaces, flipping and building UX that helps you flip bytes and bits. And it's really expensive to maintain that stuff. There's a ton of planning and thinking that goes into making a really good user experience. Most software is not good at this. Even incumbents like NetSuite and Workday aren't good at this. They're not even good at helping you flip bits, and they optimize at selling and contract locking to get people to pay for their software. Now I'm like, okay, well, I guess what's the version of a sailboat? And like, do I have to just liquidate, or I guess use the Cortez metaphor, burn the ships? And what's the new paradigm that I need to start buying up now to that point? So I'll leave that open to you. What's my version or your version of, I'm going to start investing in this railroad thing, but I'm still in the transportation business. It's just the technology changed and I'm just going to switch over.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a pretty good analogy. Based on what I'm seeing, the types of businesses I'm working with and types of companies, for them, there is an unfortunate part of it, which is basically just replace humans with AI. And that's quite an unfortunate piece that personally I'd like to see less of. I would like to say I'm working more with humans rather than replacing them, but unfortunately, I'm working with lots of companies who come to us and they're like, yes, we now need to invest in agentic infrastructure because the level of automation and ROI we can get out of it is simply mind-blowing. We have an official
Fiduciary?
judiciary commitment to our board. We need to increase sales. We need to reduce costs. And so agentic systems in the world I'm seeing really coming into play there, of just replacing what would otherwise be long human labor, creating infrastructure for applications, and AI replacing both the infrastructure and the applications that are getting built on top of that infrastructure. And that's kind of like the new railroad to me. You're replacing the technology that builds both the infrastructure and what sits on top of it.
Yeah, instead of doing ServiceNow and GitHub, hooking up to the GitHub MCP to your agent. And
in many cases, build versus buy argument now just becomes a whole lot more existential for many companies. And instead of build versus buy, you're now looking much more at build rather than buy, because the barrier of entry to creating something that'll give you 50% of what ServiceNow does has just become much more accessible and cheaper. And so why wouldn't you do that and save costs? So now you're looking at a world where, most SaaS platforms simply cannot deliver value fast enough at the rate that they need, because they've built businesses that are predicated on people and salaries, and they cannot justify the costs for that, because the value for which they're selling their software does not measure up to the buyer basically standing against that and comparing it with cloud code and being able to write the exact same software in a month and then just maintaining that through AI as well.
Yeah, and there's probably way more sailors before railroads. And so thinking about like replacing humans, it's not like necessarily replacing humans. It's like it's replacing tasks, and humans that have built their whole career around specializing in a certain set of tasks. Those are the ones that get disrupted. But my optimistic view is that the ones that are willing to like reinvent themselves, there will be jobs for you, right? Is my bet, because it's like, oh, well, then maybe they stop being a sailor, and they took up jobs building out the new railroad infrastructure. Eventually, the infrastructure got built. They don't need as many like laborers. Now it's like, oh, maybe it's, working at a train station, stuff like you're adapting what your day to day looks like to adapt with the market, rather than a great example from a past guest is talking about Netflix, right? Like before they switched to AWS, it's a famous case study of them, like basically being willing to be the sports team metaphor, willing to cut people off the team, not because of performance, but because the business doesn't need you anymore. Like, and we need to swap out talent to make sure that the team wins. And so these actual hard data racking and stacking infra engineers were part of the original streaming operations. And then they did a cost analysis that, okay, if we move over to AWS, we'll be able to significantly save costs and then scale the business to even more, load up more, handle more streamers. And people were like, oh, that's terrible. Those people lost their jobs. It's who didn't lose their jobs? The people that started getting into DevOps.
Yeah.
And they're, okay, cool. I'm going to be a DevOps person on top of AWS now and reinventing the tasks. And that's kind of how I feel about this whole thing is they're replacing humans. They're replacing humans that are doing tasks that cost the market rate for that task has gone down significantly. And so to anyone listening that's, I feel my job's at risk, it's okay, well, what's the next abstraction of your work? You could still be an engineer. But what's the new engineering skill that's valuable? What do you think that would be? What's the new engineering skill that's valuable if your whole career as an engineer has been manually programming software is really expensive and hard and a hyper specialized skill? And now that the cost of that service is devalued significantly, what do you do next? How would an engineer reinvent themselves?
It's a major problem that Microsoft is talking about today. Actually, Mark Rusinovich released a paper on it. LinkedIn, recommend everyone listening to go check it out. And what they've come up with is that junior developers are essentially no longer needed. And that's a very harsh reality statement that came from them. And they were like, now you need senior engineers to oversee AI because someone needs to write the prompt, someone needs to guide it, someone needs to provide guardrails. And all of that is extremely needed. But how are you going to get senior engineers if there's no junior engineers anymore? And so they released a white paper that proposes different ways of tackling that problem. But for sure, I think senior engineers are always going to be needed. But the question is how if we're not going to give junior engineers a chance. So I think the software engineering craft, to preserve it, is going to need to change right from the beginning. And engineers will still need to be trained on code, but they will need to focus much more on skills that are developed much later in their career. Critical thinking, asking the right questions, architecture, compliance, security, all of those stuff that basically need to come up with plans that LLMs then ingest to create the code that you want to arrive at the outcome that you eventually want to get to.
Yeah, I think the new hot skill in all jobs is spending more time planning, like becoming a better planner in general. The last company I worked for had what I would consider the Navy SEALs of engineers. Like they were the best engineers I ever worked with. And everything that they did worked. And the reason was they didn't operate most engineering teams. They were not order takers. It was actually really hard to get them to do anything that wasn't well rationalized. And I'm super glad that they did, because the software that we made, performant, really, they loved it. We were able to push the limits reliably. And they had a thing that put PMs off that worked with them. They weren't the most PM friendly engineering team, but hey, can't argue with the results. They had a mandatory step in their SDLC software development lifecycle process called a technical design document. Even if it was a small feature, you had to write out in words what your plan was, down to the GraphQL queries, the architecture diagrams, level 0, level 1, level 2. You had to write out, and that added 1 or 2 weeks, sometimes even a month for bigger features to the life cycle, which was really a big adjustment. As product person is, man, we could have just been coding this thing, but everyone knows it's never been that a great of experience just jumping into coding when you have vague requirements, because then they start taking liberties. The user acceptance process, testing process, and QA process is, oh, we missed all these use cases. We have to refactor the code. Now it's going to take 6 months to do, or 2 extra months. And so it's moving. They did is they move slow to move fast. And by just taking the time to plan, even though they were going to eventually manually execute the work, and they would show it to engineering, staff engineers, and they would critique the plan and be, I'd do this query, or I'd update your query to this. It would make it way faster. When they shipped it, it worked every time, and within very tight time frames. And so what people didn't like about that process, and this is before AI got good, is everyone's thinking opportunity costs. If we're not shipping things, what are we missing? And it's okay, if it doesn't cost much to build the thing, then we actually do have more time to plan and design, bring design back into the engineering process.
Yeah, I think this optimization is really called for, because most software doesn't work the way you intended it to do, because you skip the design stage or the architectural phase. And so if you invest more in that, it doesn't matter who gets the job done, it's AI or human, the job will be better, whether it's AI or human. So if we're making enough time now to plan things, this is now the central job of the software engineer who hands over the work to an automated machine. You can expect better work all up.
AI getting good was the reason before the current role that I'm in this recording, I'm currently a staffed product designer, and I started my career as a designer, but I liked the planning process. It was just too expensive to do as a designer. And so the decision is, if you're a really good strategic designer, you probably have to just go into product management. And so I did a couple of years of product management, and I'm okay, at least I could give designers they need to do their best work as a product manager than as a very high level designer. As soon as I saw how I was getting good, AI got good during my product management tenure. And then I'm like, this is the easiest job ever. Man, PMing is so fun now, because all the schlep work and PMing is so easy. You just have granola running, taking notes for you. You take the outputs, put it into a template for a decision doc, or, you use it to think through. You take all this context, you use it to strategically think with Claude, and you could actually have a pretty good, velocity on planning and stuff. But then it's okay, but now my job's constraining me. I could just go do the next thing now, do the designs now and start executing. This is going to be a multi-month project. As a PM, I'm not needed anymore. And so I'm going back to design. This is the best time alive to be a designer and an engineer. That's my stance. And even as a PM, now it's, hey, what's the high level abstraction? It's market segmentation, the customers more. If AI is better than writing emails, and I'd argue Claude, the output of Claude is better than most emails I've read, verbose emails from product leaders.
Yeah.
Now it's, we could get so much more done. If you want to be more strategic as a designer, you can be, and that, or you could, if you want to take your designs and take them to at least the front end layer, you could do that too. And the main insight for me and how I've changed my workflow as a designer is I am basically just saying, I'm running research queries from an internal company based on all Slack threads, Gong calls, stuff like that. And I'm planning out how I would do the research myself. These are the questions I would ask. This is the framework I would organize my findings in. And basically just writing out a narrative of how I would have done it, and then having the AI do it, but 10x the variations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't actually rough out the concepts anymore. Instead of doing 2 or 3 concepts, I'll do 100 concepts, because I have a junior designer. I don't know. I just think that's really fun, because now it's then when I have a good plan, I will manually with my hands do the final dialing in execution work. But like the idea that I'm handing off to engineers, it's fucking proven. It's like steel man. Like we thought through everything at that point because I've had time to plan.
Yeah, resonates with me.
Yeah. And so now here's my opinion about like juniors is like now that like planning is like basically the new job, like the quality of your plans, your ability to write, your vocabulary is becoming more and more important. I've been thinking a lot like with junior designers, like what are the agentic workflows that they need to do? Because usually the junior designers, it was like the grunt work, like getting well scoped stuff like made because it was expensive to like get artifacts created. My current thought is like, okay, well, what does a junior designer plan? I would think that like any new designer coming out of school, you would give them still a very like relatively small scope, maybe a little bit bigger than what they're used to in the past. And then you'd be like, okay, write like a strategy narrative, like, or spend some time figuring out like marketing and segmentation, like in like getting this data from your PM and coming up with like a strategic framing of what kind of design patterns we should use, and then come back to me with what you have, and we'll go review it. I think it's maybe that. Um, how would you have like a junior engineer, like if you were to hire one right now, like what like agentic orchestrator tasks would you delegate to that junior?
I think historically we expected junior engineers to be able to churn out code really fast and produce a lot of it. And now I think it's going to get flipped on its head where junior engineers are going to be measured on their fact to adapt to new skills and learn really quickly. And this is what people are going to be measured on because they're going to need to read a lot of content that was probably generated both by humans and AI or synthesized by both, understand it to be able to come up with a new set of instructions for what they want to achieve. So it's going to be less outputting and more inputting for juniors just to be able to get a good big picture of everything, to be able to understand what to output to the actual AI system. And so this is what I think juniors will focus on, being able to context switch a lot, being able to ingest a lot of new information very quickly, and keep a mental model of many different forms of relationships that they're ingesting both from AI systems and humans, to understand the bigger picture and how it goes about and helping them plan for the actual work that they want to get done.
So what did it look like in the olden days? As of this recording, the olden days are 2 years ago, where there's a junior engineer dynamic and we're in a stand-up meeting. Like, are we expecting them to like understand the whole entity relationship diagram of the current code base, or are they just being handed like, no, this is the data tables you need to use, code this now, and they don't actually understand the bigger picture beyond themselves?
I think there will have to be some time carved out for them to understand the bigger picture, for sure, before just going into the code directly.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, and I think it'll be possible because there will be senior engineers in the team who are able just to churn out code much quicker because you already have AI agents doing that for you. So there will need to be more time to train those junior engineers to be at a higher level of understanding so that they can start producing code through AI quicker, rather than just grabbing a task, focusing on that, but then missing the bigger picture.
Now, the reason I'm like asking these specific questions is I think it's really easy for me to grok through this by looking at like the concept of delegation,
Mhm.
something very specific like job families, like delegating to like a junior employee. Because eventually I want to see if we could get to an insight about delegating. Why would you choose to delegate to a specialized agent software company versus just doing it yourself in a Claude code instance where you set it up and orchestrate it yourself? There's a really great maxim I've heard about AI, and I think it's the reason why like AI hasn't replaced jobs. They've replaced tasks, but they haven't replaced jobs yet.
Mhm.
Is that AI automates tasks but doesn't automate responsibility. And delegation isn't never was delegating tasks that were your job to give to someone else. Like I just talked to a management consultant in a past episode where I'm like, oh, well, what's the difference between like a really good partner at a management consulting firm delegating to an associate versus a bad partner? And he's like, they wouldn't have become a partner if they were bad at that. That's like the level, like that's the level is like they know they aren't doing any of the work because if you're a partner, it's not your job to do any of these tasks. Like it's always been the associate's job. And so you're not delegating anything. You're directing already predefined responsibilities to associates. And the reason why I would rather hire a junior for certain like tasks is because I'm hiring them to be responsible over a certain scope of work
Yeah.
that I don't want to burn calories in my brain to think through. And if you're delegating to AI, you're just delegating tasks that are your job and your responsibility to make sure that they happen. And so like AI is not coming after your job, but like it's going to get really hard to justify doing things manually in the future. And it's like, why? No, you could do this faster with AI. Why? Like, you have like pride in the craft that you did it manually. Like, that's not a good enough reason.
Where
Get
it's
ready.
not.
Yeah. So like, what one thing that you alluded to, in the engineering like job ladder is that it might be like you might be like cutting out the whole like junior as we know it rungs on the ladder and making it shorter. Would it be like, would you expect juniors to like be able to like make mid-level outcomes, senior level outcomes in your mind?
Much quicker, yes. Because they have access to tools that can 20x what they do manually and also explain things to them in a very concise way. In so many situations, junior engineers are bottlenecked on their career growth because they don't have enough mentors or their team leaders are not available to them because they manage a whole bunch of other things and they've got other responsibilities. But if you have access to AI that has access to your digital infrastructure and system and records of the past and history and knowledge and all that, it can basically drive not just decisions, but the reason why it made past decisions to you in a very concise way that would otherwise, in the old world, as you called it, or old days, would be much more hard to get and more time consuming.
Yeah. And so it's basically just raising the bar on outputs. But like if you're able to like meet those outputs as like a junior, it's just like we just raise the bar for everybody. Right.
Yes.
So like in the framework that I have is like the cost of agency has always been very high. If you like look at like Middle Ages, security, the cost of security was very high. Like like the people that had power were like if you had an army and could, Game of Thrones your way to the top. Eventually, like the Industrial Revolution reduced the cost of security because the power shifted to who has the money. So like J.P. Morgan's, Rockefellers, right? And then eventually the thing like database technology, relational databases, Oracle, pre-internet, reduced the cost of like data. And so like power shifted to people that had the data to make better decisions. And then but you still needed a ton of capital because you needed to rack up your own data centers and stuff in order to compete. Internet gives us access to everybody's data centers.
Mhm.
And so now it's like the cost of like doing something with it depends on how good your plan is. And so this like the economics shifted to the rise of the MBA and the product manager and like where your job is to collect, synthesize, and like maintain context that's really hard to like aggregate. And so everybody's like job, like engineer, designer, was take business requirements, go execute, don't think too hard. We need to like get these things done now.
Yeah.
Now AI is pretty good at taking notes, pretty good at like pattern doing analysis. I wouldn't say synthesis. That's reliable. That's a responsibility thing that I wouldn't delegate to AI to like synthesize for me. But um, now it's like, what's stopping us from like planning more, right? And exercising our agency, and which effectively points out like, why would you just say that? Oh, I'm an SQL wizard. Why would anybody be impressed by that anymore? Or I'm really fast at generating code. Why would anyone be impressed at that anymore? And so like you're just getting measured by different outcomes. And so like where I was getting at is like I'm a staff designer, but now I have like executive level agency that's affordable to me now, where I can actually think bigger, broader, and still stay on top of my like individual contributor responsibilities. Now, that's great if I choose to exercise it. But in the business case, right? Technically, you could make everything with Cloud Code, but it's your responsibility to maintain it, make the skill files, know that how the technology works to make those like agentic instructions and system prompts. You basically have to be a good orchestrator, and not everyone's a good orchestrator. So I guess like what responsibilities are you, the customers of, your company, like delegating to you by paying you?
Yeah, so they're running agents at scale to do backend automation, right? So they will run a Kubernetes cluster, and these will run 1,000 agents on them. Each agent with a specific task to connect to the database and automate a whole bunch of processes, another agent to talk to the users and synthesize information or get a back and forth conversation going. And if any of those agents fail, then they need to start back up from the beginning, that could translate into massive costs for them. Because imagine you have an agent that basically ingests a document, reads it, makes some summarization classification, then saves it to a database. Imagine you have 1,000 of these workflows with steps. Step 1, read the data. Step 2, understand it. Step 3, classify. Step 4, save it. If you have 1,000 agents now running, all coming to step 3, but now you have a network blip, a solar flare, AWS went down, whatever, and all of those agents crash, and now you need to pay for 3,000 LLM calls from the beginning, you're going to go bankrupt real quick. So our customers come to us because we have the technology to make sure that if there is a catastrophic failure, no matter what happens, we can make those agents pick up where they left off and they continue with their state. They're eventually essentially immortal agents. They never lose context, they never lose progress, they never lose their state. That's one of the major issues we're seeing with agentic systems today. They are not reliable enough to run at scale.
Yeah. And did you manage like in the past life, was that like your core responsibility is like as an infra engineer, like managing Kubernetes
Yep,
clusters?
correct. Yeah,
And so like you're like Cornelius Vanderbilt, you're getting like pretty good salary being in the I'm a super specialized infra admin business. And now you're like, okay, how can I take this taste that I developed, delegate it to a product, and then scale my impact?
correct. It's how we're taking reliability that so far was applied to Kubernetes workloads and apply them to AI.
And for guests that don't understand what Kubernetes is, like you explain to me like what maybe to like a non-technical person, like what that is, why it's important, why is it expensive to manage?
Yeah, Kubernetes is an orchestrator of different business processes. So every type of company needs to run its servers somewhere. We all know that there's a cloud and there's servers running there, but something needs to manage them. And Kubernetes is a project that came out of Google that basically takes those servers and manages them in a way that is resilient. But it's only hardware level resilience, and application level resilience is still something that software engineers need to be very mindful of, especially when it comes to AI. And this is where our technology basically comes in.
What are some business cases that the Kubernetes like technology was used for? Maybe like what's like a business process that like maybe we'd all be familiar with that is likely powered by Kubernetes?
Yeah, payment processing at most of your large banks, right? You basically go to your mobile app, you want to, let's say, move money around. So it's going to send them the money transfer to the server. That's going to land up on a server running on Kubernetes that's processing it. And then another server on Kubernetes will take that input and save it to the database. So you have a bunch of these processes communicating.
Okay, that sounds bad if that breaks.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
so the decision that a company like a bank, when they're like looking for vendors, um, is okay, can I accept the responsibility of these payment processing tasks breaking for my business? Olden days, hell no, we need to hire a technical talent to like maintain this infra in our business. But now in the world age of AI, it's like, okay, I need to hire and I mean this, it might be coming off offensive right now, but like a hyper specialized like IT person that like might not have the soft skills to like be easy to work with, or so, and they might know, like a Salesforce admin, know that they have a ton of leverage to not
Yeah.
be super compliant. And it's like, hey, AI usually is pretty cooperative. And so like if I'm like a small fintech or bank, it's like I don't need to hire a hyper specialized infrastructure person to like manage my AWS or like my Kubernetes clusters. I could basically, is that like your business model? Is like you buy into your platform to stand on top of someone's infra, or actually plug into like another, like your infra for
Yeah,
managing this?
we plug in into organizations' existing infrastructure. So they just deploy our software, and we make sure that any AI agent that they're running is basically immortal, and that no matter what happens to it, it'll always remember what it did previously.
Yeah. And so the promise is that our AI agents are so reliable
Correct.
that you can trust us with this critical responsibility.
Yep, exactly.
You know what's funny is like you guys like flipped the buy versus build rule of thumb on its head, because you turned something that I think historically has been like, oh, if it's like a high risk business process, build it like in-house, like in your operations. Like we cannot delegate this responsibility to a SaaS platform. And then the opposite was like, hey, non-differentiating features, like the lower stake stuff, buy a software. And now it's flipped. It's like, oh, we could actually go to a company and delegate responsibility for these high risk business processes because their agents are just better than ours. And
Correct.
we could just build, like, what's stopping DoorDash from just building restaurant management software themselves and just and making the pie bigger for themselves? And so now it's like the build versus pie is like completely flipped. That's just so interesting.
Yeah, agreed. And they can continue running their own agents. They don't have to use our agents at all. Like we will just give them a very simple library that they include in their code, and that's it. They're off to the races. They can guarantee the fact that agent is now resilient to any form of real world failure.
And how do you, what have you guys learned about pricing? Like, how do you price something like this?
Very good question. Most companies want to be SaaS companies. They want to create cloud infrastructure that you can swipe in with a credit card and $10 a month or $100 a month or whatever. Our companies are the Fortune 500s, the Fortune 1000s. And so our model is these companies cannot send their data out to a cloud provider because they need it internal and there's data governance and whatnot. So we install our platform into their infrastructure and we basically charge by cluster. And so we can reach much larger ACVs, which is average contract value.
That's okay, man. This is like, you're wrong. This is super huge of an insight. Like if you have always been a like high agency person in the company, and the reality of the world pre-AI was like you couldn't compete and like start your own company unless you completely abandon the craft and like learn to become sales or marketing or whatever, and have to like delegate responsibility by hiring a bunch of employees to like even compete in SaaS. You can bet on yourself now that like, hey, I have like the care and responsibility and agency to be as close to a sure thing as possible to companies out there.
Yeah.
And like you're hiring, like it's almost like you could also be hiring like these like enterprise SaaS companies like yours just based off reputation of like, oh, this person's operating the business. Like I trust their technology that we're delegating to their agents. And there was like, yeah, anyways, in interest of time, like I need to digest that over a few more episodes, but like you're wrong. Do you feel like there's anything that hasn't been said that should be said? Because I'm sure yeah,
No,
there's a
I
lot.
think we covered a lot of ground and yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Fantastic. What, uh, so if people wanted to find you, find your work, your thinking, um, Like, what are like the top like evergreen ways, like social media to find you, and what else would you like people to know about, contacting you if they're interested in this conversation?
Yeah, so on social, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Yaron Schneider, YARON SCHNEIDR. Not many with that name. And then just for general web stuff, diagrid.io, diagrid.io.
Yeah. And we have time for like one more question, because you're incredibly efficient as a guest and you make it very easy. What are you most excited about? Like what are the things that you're most excited about being like alive and a professional during this time in history in the SaaS business?
I am incredibly thankful that I am in a position today where I can actually write the infrastructure software for AI and get to decide on how companies operate AI reliably and securely in the cloud based on our positions. My company and myself were also in the Agentic AI Foundation. I was actually elected to chair the workflow and reliability group there. So I'm just very happy to have the opportunity to lead that effort.
Can you explain that name drop? What's the
Yeah.
Agentic AI Foundation? I never heard of that.
So there's Linux Foundation, which is a huge foundation to basically govern most of the software that you know and that the entire world runs on today. And under the Linux Foundation, there is a new Agentic AI Foundation that has OpenAI and Anthropic, which are competitors, under that same roof, together with Google, Amazon, Microsoft. And all of those large companies are essentially taking a charter to define what ethical, reliable, and responsible AI looks like for worldwide adoption in the next coming years. And this foundation has a bunch of working groups, 7 of them. And I am leading one of those when it comes to workflow orchestration, meaning I am charted with defining the scope for how AI systems work reliably.
So it's almost like a scientific community where like you're peer reviewing
Correct.
research. So there's this pioneer, like we're in the pioneer phase of AI, and that's what you're grateful for is, we actually get to like figure out how do we tame the frontier.
Yes. And recommend people to adopt AI securely. Yeah.
Yeah, and move west. Yeah. That is really exciting. I'll close it with this thought, because I remember like reading about the early e-commerce days and the people that made like their name in the early e-commerce days, and just being like, man, how lucky were they to be born during a macro headwind, like or like a macro wind, not headwind, but like a macro wind where there was no precedent. There were no rules yet. And you could just ride that train if you had the hustle and willingness to learn. And then, I don't know, the universe came back to me and was like, here you go. Here's your opportunity. There's no rules. If you want to play the game and be there first, do it. And so that's something I'm very excited about as well.
Yeah, totally get that.
Yeah. You're wrong. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Thank you, you too.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.